This reunion of jazz giants exists because of a 50th anniversary release of the soundtrack for It's the Easter Beagle, Charlie Brown. Now, jazz fans and Peanuts fans know that these specials and the films, the Peanuts films, featured incredible work from Vince Guaraldi, who was surrounding himself with some of the best musicians playing at the time. And so Lee Mendelson Film Productions has been releasing these incredibly I call them like newly renovated soundtracks where they pull directly from the source tapes of these recording sessions. You've never heard the music from the Peanut specials like you hear them now on these new soundtracks. They are the ones who lined up this reunion. So I want to give tremendous thanks to Lee Mendelson Film Productions. Jason Mendelson and Sean Mendelson are here in the recording. They are the sons of Lee Mendelson, the legendary Emmy-winning producer. Jason Mendelson is an Emmy winner as well. But they lined up this conversation with Seward McCain, who is the longest serving bass player for these Peanut specials, with Vince Guaraldi. He played on 8 Peanut specials. He also plays flutes. We've got Mike Clark, the legendary drummer. He's a funk drummer. He's a jazz drummer. You know him from his work with Herbie Hancock, in addition to Vince Guaraldi. And Eliot Zigmund, who is also with the Bill Evans Trio. He's with Chet Baker. You can hear him with Stan Getz, many others. These guys are giants in their field. I got the recording started as soon as they started to say hello to each other. So we really are a fly on the wall for this recording. This is 2 things. This is a reunion of these band members who have not talked to each other, in some cases, in decades. And this is also a spotlight on their work being rediscovered and represented like we've never heard it before, thanks to these new soundtrack releases. So, without further ado, Seward McCain, Mike Clark, Eliot Zigmund, and Jason and Sean Mendelson.
Seward?
Hey, Eliot.
Been a minute and a half since I've seen you, man.
Yeah, really. Boy, oh boy.
So have the 3 of you been together on Zoom or in person anytime recently? Eliot and Seward and Mike?
No, I haven't seen Seward since I lived in California.
Yeah.
In the 70s. So we're going back.
Yeah.
We did a lot back then together, but unfortunately.
Hey, Seward. Hey, Mike. I've seen Mike once or twice down at Jazz Camp West.
Uh-huh. Seward was responsible for getting me with Vince. He was Vince's bass player at that time, and he managed to, I guess, recommend Vince to me or whatever, however it went. And I started working with him back then. And I think I stayed in San Francisco for another year, maybe year and a half, maybe a little longer. I forget.
Uh-huh.
We did a fair amount of work in that period, and it was great to play with him, and that trio experience probably helped me get the audition with Bill Evans. Not get the audition, but get the gig after the audition. Just that experience of playing trio, and I guess Seward and I played a lot with Art Landy too, in trio and in quintet. So that experience helped as well, so.
Yeah.
We worked a lot back then, man. But I've never seen you or heard you or played with you on upright bass. You were playing all electric back then.
Even with Art Landy?
Yeah. I never saw you play upright bass, man.
Well, everybody was wanting that at the time, but I started out on upright.
It's funny.
Yeah.
I just moved over to it like everybody else.
We talked to Chuck Berghofer of the Wrecking Crew, who played on one of the specials, and he said, that's electric bass that Vince had me playing. He said, maybe the one time I ever played electric bass was on that session with Vince Guaraldi. So that was the charge at the time of Vince.
Yeah, Vince wanted it.
Yeah, and this is kind of the end of that scene too, because by Derek Bang's liner notes for this release, he talks about how after this, there was like a return to that acoustic sound. And I believe, Seward, he talks about you like go get an upright bass. It's time to put down the electric and go back to the upright.
Yeah, he just said it one night. We were on the gig and says, let's go back to upright. I said, well, I sold it. He says, well, go get one. So I went out the next day and got one over in Oakland. Boy, did I get a nice bass too. Then I would love to still have that one. That one was an outstanding sounding instrument. So anyway, the next night I came in and played it and nursed my blisters for about a week.
You had like a day to prepare, right?
Yeah, one day, exactly. Friday night and then Saturday night I came in with the upright. And then it was over. Then we were just doing upright. But we were still doing a lot of that same fusion-y kind of stuff. But he wanted to hear it on the upright, so okay. So I did.
Let me establish a little context for what we're talking about. So we're recording this on the 75th anniversary year of Peanuts. And the bonus track that's on this release, the Woodstock medley, was recorded it was recorded in the place 50 years later that these tracks were originally recorded in. So this is sort of an alignment of a lot of different anniversaries all at one time. It's the Easter Beagle Charlie Brown debuted on CBS on April the 9th, 1974. That was 5 days before Easter at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern. And it was nominated, along with Be My Valentine, Charlie Brown, for an Emmy that year. So this was a big deal. And I want to kind of talk to you guys about that. One of the things that I always wonder when I talk to musicians, or these specials were seen by millions and millions of people. Did anyone feel, and this question is for all of you, did anyone feel a specific sense of pressure knowing the audience was going to be massive? I mean, this is different from a club show or even a live concert. This is going out to millions of people. What sort of preparation, or how, mentally, how do you prepare for that?
Well, here's how there was no preparation when I did this. I did quite a few of these tracks with Vince, with different people. I played quite a few with Seward. Paul Jackson was on some, and Ron McClure. And another guy, a Japanese guy that I can't remember his name. Koji, was there somebody?
Koji. It was Koji. I forget his last name, but it's Koji.
But back to the Vince Guaraldi thing, for me, he would just call me. We were like friends besides musician guys. He'd call me all the time just to talk stuff. And so he would call me and say, "Hey, man, we're going to go in the studio today." No clue about what we're going to play. So I'd go in and he would say, "Okay, give me a groove kind of like this." Or he'd make up a little vibe and we'd just play to it. Only one time, well, I can't remember that far back, but in my memory, there was only one time that there were two times that there was a completed piece, and it was like a blues form or something easy, or maybe even just a one-tone center thing where you just groove. And then and many times it'd be like, "Give me a minute, give me 28 seconds of this," and I had no idea what it was for until after the fact. I didn't even know I'm completely in a jazz musician's mindset. I don't come up for air. So this stuff had aired on TV for years before I even knew I was on it. I had no idea I was even on these things. I just remembered we went into Wally Hyder's, that's what the name of the place used to be, where I started my career with Herbie and Eddie Henderson, Julian Priester, a whole lot of cats. We all did, I guess, who lived in the Bay Area, played there. But that's how I remember. Never did he say this to me. Do I recall him saying anything about Charlie Brown? And when we did live gigs, we would play a little bit of these grooves, but it was mostly he played a Wynton, except for what Stewart and I did, which was an electric band. I later came back with him and he played like Wynton Kelly, and we just swing all night, at the El Matador and some of these gigs. So I played with him for a long time up until I got the gig with Hancock. And then I got Vince Lodiano that gig that you guys were on down there where Vince finally passed away.
Well, what were some of Eliot, Seward, what were some of your experiences behind the scenes? Seward, we've already talked about some of this, so I don't want to make you repeat yourself, but Eliot,
I didn't really grow up out there, so unlike Mike and Seward, I didn't know Vince that long. I mean, like I said, we played together. I don't know, maybe it was closer to 2 years. Gigs were spread out. I didn't, we didn't have a friendship type relationship. He wouldn't call me except when there was work. And I just always remembered him as being a really pleasant guy who loved to swing. I mean, we played jazz. There was very little fusion music, very, very little eighth note music. Most of it was just ding-a-ding, swing, like real fun to play. I mean, Seward is one of the few cats that I remember being able to play successfully with an electric bass player playing jazz, So it always felt good. And I mean, for the Bay Area, it was a good class of gigs. There were always nice joints that paid fairly decently, unlike some of the stuff you're subjected to today, where, for whatever reason, the conditions or the money not being what it should be. So it was always good to be around him. And I remember at the end, we were doing the Peanuts recording, and my wife had already moved back to New York, and I was just waiting to go. And he kept on saying, "Hey, man, it's cool. If you want to go, you go." And no, I said, I really, for me, doing a recording with Vince and just being around him and making that kind of money was worth sticking around for another month or two. And so, he was part of a very good period for me in San Francisco, moving out there for 4 years. I mean, I went out there originally more as a hippie than a jazz musician. We were basically trying to get away from the city, from crowds, from a lot of people. I had kind of reached a point with New York where I just felt it was stifling me. And I just ended up doing a lot of interesting things in San Francisco because I came from New York and I was kind of for a minute there, a big fish in a small pond. There weren't that many people who grew up playing bop out there. So, I could, and, so I got to work with a lot of interesting people, Vince being one, and he was really like the capper at the end, the guy that I remember from that period of time in San Francisco. And then it got time to go back. My wife at the time especially wanted to go back and get a degree. So we ended up going back to New York, which I was against. It seemed like going back to darkness. I was born and raised in New York. And after the light of California and it's the vibe, I really was against going back. But it turned out well because less than a year later, I auditioned for Bill Evans and I got that gig, which I probably never would have gotten if I had stayed in New York. Stayed in San Francisco. So, but
Can I ask you more about that? Because you're talking about like an East Coast sound versus East Coast jazz scene versus West Coast jazz scene, and you preferred. See, I think of New York as being the home of so much jazz, right? The clubs and the culture around it. So that's interesting to me.
not just the clubs, because there were always some nice clubs in San Francisco. I think it's just the thing, the bop thing was so strong here during the 40s and 50s that, growing up here in the 50s and 60s, that was the music that you practiced and you heard, and people just became more proficient in it. I think in San Francisco, there was so many different types of music going on that cats would be experts in lots of different things and maybe not that centered in playing bebop, So there weren't that many guys that did it out there. I mean, Mike was one of the guys, but I knew Mike more as a fusion player out there. I didn't really know that he was, Mike is one of my favorite drummers at this point. So I really didn't know at that point that his expertise in jazz was
Well,
like.
I came from a stone bebop background, and I never thought about playing any of the eighth note stuff other than a bossa nova until right about that period. Everybody was switching to funk. Pete Escovedo lived around the corner from me, Paul Jackson. And in order to survive, I had to stay alive, and jazz gigs were getting to be thin even then. So I made it my business to get a little bit of funky stuff together.
Yeah.
It's called rent. For me, at that point, it was called rent.
I hear you, man. And
I had to stay. So, and it wasn't that much of a stretch to change for me, because I just took the Philly Joe stuff and divided it on the hi-hat, snare, and bass drum and made
right.
8/8 instead of splang-a-dang. And I went, oh, well, this is sort of, okay. It wasn't rocket science. I didn't get, but it worked, and I was at the right place at the right time too. And when Vince hired me, Vince Denham, my friend, a saxophone player, came to a gig and heard me playing and I was playing sort of a funk gig with Paul Jackson, and it was sort of in between funk and jazz all at once. And he said, "You'd be perfect for Vince Guaraldi." And I had heard Seward play many times at the Weekender. I think, Seward, you were on that gig with Mel Martin and Coke Escovedo. Is that true?
It was Pete and Coke Escovedo.
Okay. And you were, and I knew you were great. And I'm like, well, yeah, Vince Guaraldi. And then I ended up but we were playing, they didn't even call it fusion. I don't know if they called it anything, but we just not swing, play some rock beat, Vince used to say. And so I would, and we just improvise. That's how I saw it, you know.
What year was that?
71?
71?
70, 71. Yeah.
Yes.
71. Yeah.
I do want to point out, just to interrupt here, all these guys were in their early to mid 20s. Well, Vince was in his mid 40s at this period. So Vince had the wherewithal to bring all the young guys around him, which is why they're all still thriving today. And it was kind of his choice at the time, right? Am I wrong, gentlemen? All the young guys were surrounding Vince, right?
Uh-huh. Well, that's what leaders do mostly, though, you know.
Can I answer your question and ask a question to the musicians, Heath, real quick?
Yeah, please.
On that. So from a production point of view, when we would put the TV shows together, and Sean and I, as kids, were the voices, and then later I got to put the shows together with my dad, Lee Mendelson. We'd spend about a week doing the story. Either Charles Schultz, the writer, or we'd take it from the strips to make a story after he'd passed. And then we'd spend several months waiting after we got the storyboard back for the animation to come in, after doing the voices. And the final piece was always the music, but it was literally 1 week of prep, several months of waiting, and then 1 week of editing and music. And that, of course, was my favorite time because I get to go into the studio and hear the musicians. But at the time, I thought, to answer your earlier question about what impact this had or what we thought about our involvement, at the time, I thought that the musicians were super cool. They knew what they were doing, and they'd knock it out like that, right? They were always expert. And this is the next generation. This is the generation in the 90s and in the aughts and today. But I always thought, oh, they were super into it. It wasn't until we started meeting the gentlemen you have here and we found the old tapes that I realized most of them, as Mike just alluded to, didn't even know they were playing on a Charlie Brown production at all, nor would it matter, right? Because it's like they said, it's a gig, and the gig is good, and the gig is with people hopefully they liked playing with. And the beauty of finding these tapes is half the time they're just jamming. They're just having fun. They've got to get that 30-second cue. They got to lay that bed down under Peppermint Patty walking across the screen to go yell at Charlie Brown or whatever's going on. But the reality is, for them, it's just what they do every day. And their relationship with Vince was one in gigs, was one in whatever the Monday night gig might be at there might be the weekend at El Matador. It might be something at Butterfield's. Whatever the gig was their main reaction. This is one day, maybe 2 days, right? For a few hours in an afternoon. That's not as important as playing in front of people, I don't think. So the beauty of this is, in many cases, nobody's heard this music. We had never heard it. The part that made the TV was great. But the most beautiful part is you hear them talking, you hear them bantering, and you hear them jamming behind the scenes in a way that none of them probably A, remember doing because it was just another Tuesday, or B, it was not on their radar because they were making this to hit that 30 seconds. So when you hear that longer cue, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, that's the most joyous part of this for me, is we found all the stuff the tape's never been played. They recorded it, they made it for the master of the show, and it sat in a vault for over 50 years. It's never been spun up. And so their playing is amazing, but the recording is untouched. So you're getting it for the first time. Even some of these gentlemen sometimes are hearing this for the very first time. So that for me is the fun of it, and maybe why they don't remember some of this, because it was a Tuesday and it didn't mean anything at the time. So anyway, I just throw that out there as a question too for you guys.
Well, I had a blast playing with Seward, a guy named Paul Potian, and Vince Denham, and we were heavily influenced by everything that Miles and Ron and Tony did, Joe Henderson, Jack DeJohnette. We were trying to I was trying to move away from Jimmy Cobb. This had nothing to do with the funk stuff, into Tony and Elvin and all of this type of thing. And it was all new to me then. So I took a stab at it, not quite knowing what to do. And it was in this band that Seward and I and Paul Pody and Vince Denham had, and we would play Black Narcissus, and we would play all of these tunes and Power to the People and whatever, and Joe Henderson. And we were like, and I loved playing with these guys, and we all understood each other, and we would come in with charts, and Paul and Seward would bring us charts, and we'd play them. And then later in Vince Guaraldi's band, I had a blast. We play at the Pier Street Annex, and all kinds of crazy cats would come in. Who was that great drummer out there that played with the piano player that used to play the Trident? George Marsh would come in, and
George Marsh, yeah.
Yeah.
Is he still around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the drummers, man. All the drummers stay alive.
Opposite of Spinal Tap for you guys.
You got to be in good shape to play the drums. And you got to keep yourself in some kind of reasonable condition.
Reasonable, indeed.
I find at this age, like going to the gym and doing exercises and walking is more important than practicing, even though I still practice. But just keeping your body in good shape steadies you well as a drummer, I'm going to be 80 next month, and I'm looking at my
Birthday.
Jesus Christ, man, how did I get here? I mean, it's unbelievable, it's like weird. And I'm still playing. I mean, I don't dig carrying the drums, but I love playing them,
Me and Lenny White we use the house drums and we bring our we use the house stands and all the hardware and bring our drums so they're light. A little Gretsch, 2 toms.
If there's house drums, I'll use them no matter what they are at this point.
Nowadays, me too. Yeah, it doesn't matter anymore.
And Jim Zimmerman, who played on Arbor Day and toured with right after you guys, he's the drummer, from San Francisco. We met up with him. He also mentioned Tony as an influence. Everybody was listening to the same folks around the early to mid 70s, so that's pretty neat.
It was a much smaller world back then. When those guys came on the scene, it was revolutionary. I mean, Tony was one of the cats that really changed the direction, man.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Early Tony came out of Jimmy Cobb kind of in a way, but
Max, Jimmy Cobb.
Yeah,
and he loved Philly Joe, and he, believe it or not, he also really dug Buddy Rich, and
I can imagine.
Yeah, well, and he dug rock and roll. He was a very far out cat to hang with. Oh my God! But I was extremely influenced by him and Elvin Jones at that time, and we were all trying to bash and play real loud. I think a lot of the West Coast guys in their attempt to be like the New York guys overdid it. We didn't know. When I got back here, I was like, oh, oops. But it was a blast playing with Seward and Vince. We had many, many great nights and some very funny things on the road. And at Butterfields, there were some funny things. And, I don't know whether I should tell this or I told this before, but Vince Guaraldi had the worst temper of any man I've ever met. And I know a lot of people with street people that are really tough. Vince had a horrific temper. And Seward, I don't know whether you were on this gig or not at Sun Valley, and we were playing this ballad around midnight, of course, and I wasn't playing. I had found this beautiful place to stop playing, and Vince was playing, and I wasn't even playing, and the bass player was just a duo at this point, which we did a lot, things like that, and I was digging it, and Vince turned around at me, and I wasn't even playing, and he said, "Relax." It's loud. It sounded like, and I got so mad. I also have a bad temper, not anymore. I'm too old, but at the time. And I took a drumstick and I hit the snare so loud it sounded like a cannon. And before the sound decayed, Vince Guaraldi was off the stage and facing us at the bar, which must have been 300 feet away. It was like, psh! And I thought, okay, well, I'm fired and I deserve to be fired because, I lost my temper. And then he came back up to the stage smiling at me with that smile and that mustache. And he said, "I always knew that about you, Mike." And he didn't fire me.
Any other memories of Vince that people want to share?
I just always remember he loved to swing. It was really pleasant to be around him. I mean, he's a nice cat. And I just love musicians that swing, I mean, there's a lot of great musicians, but they don't all swing, and it's hard to know if you're on the outside looking in. But if the band's not swinging, the drummer's hurting. The drummer's causing it, or he's hurting. One or the other.
Yeah, so there are two ways to look at that, and those are I agree.
Well, the thing about Vince's playing is that he played with rhythm. He was in the groove. Obviously, his notes were a lot of fun. And, he did, I think you're right, Mike, have a kind of a Wynton Kelly influence in there, but it was just the groove. It was this easy way to play. And my early influences were all drummers. I don't play drums at all, but I love drummers, and I'm very fascinated by it. And it's the one way that I can hook into a group is if the drummer's laying it down. If the drummer is timid or following me or something, then it's all over the place. But I like drummers who lay it down, and Vince laid it down. If it was just, say, bass and piano, he was really easy to play with because there was always a groove. He never let it go.
I have a question about influences that I want to ask you guys, because there are 3 Beethoven, well, let's call them reinterpretations on this from these sessions. Is classical a running influence for you guys, or was this something that Vince was doing and you were kind of following along?
I had a lot of classical training early on, so I like a lot of music, and he obviously could play very well. I'm sure he had classical training.
I don't remember that, to be honest with you, but I also like Seward. I mean, I studied classical music in school. I got a degree in music, so I didn't know anything about classical music when I went to college, very little, and I learned a lot. At that time, you couldn't study jazz. Even talking about jazz could get you in trouble in these music departments. But it was an excellent, it was a lot of emigres from Europe who came over, I guess, during and after the wars. It was an excellent department. And I learned a lot. And some of the deepest feelings I've had about music have come from pieces that I listen to over and over, classical pieces, Bach, or I especially like vocal music, the masses and the cantatas and stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, if it was classic and it was interesting, I certainly would have been into it. But like I said, I don't have memories of what we played.
Well, specifically, Beethoven's Piano Sonata Number 3 is on this album. Sean, I want to ask you, because in your notes, you mentioned that it comes from a different source. Can you tell me? Do you want to talk about what that source might have been?
Yeah. So on these tapes, we have the vast majority of what was laid down in the shows, and every once in a while there was a later session or a different session that Vince might do. And in this case, that piano sonata you're referencing wasn't on this reel, so we were able to pull it from the show master, and it's isolated piano. And I do want to say Vince was influenced greatly by classical music. We have his Easter theme, which is the main theme from this special. It sounds like it could be with Beethoven. And he plays, the coolest thing, and these guys know, they played it live with him, I'm sure. He Guaraldifies. That's a term I don't know if I came up with, but I keep saying it. He takes Beethoven's second movement of the Seventh Symphony. And Eliot, whether or not you remember, I think you played drums on that particular track, you or Cronkite did. And you guys play a Latin beat set to Beethoven. And it takes you to this whole other world. Instead of being this funeral dirge that you'd expect the Seventh Symphony to be, you experience this sort of magical, ethereal Latin crossover classical thing. And so that's something that I think the fans are going to be treated to, where you combine elements of jazz with classical in a profound way.
Maybe not that one, but and maybe Seward was on this, I can't remember. But at Glide Memorial Church, he had a symphony come in, or a lot of strings. I don't know how many pieces were there, but it was huge, because I played in the regular Glide Memorial Church band on Sunday. Vince had written all these charts, or had them written, and we played, this is way, and I played whatever classical music he had written. We played it on a Sunday there at the Glide Memorial. This is before you guys recorded it, I think.
Yeah.
Were you on that gig, Seward, or do you remember? Or?
I don't think so with Vince. I had played in there over the years here and there, but I don't think so with Mike and Vince. That was just before I was on it. But you know, Heath, you addressed something earlier, this business of doing this stuff, and I knew we were playing the Charlie Brown specials, but I had no idea or concept of the amount of people that ultimately it would reach. And even to this day, it's never been a real thing to me. It's one thing to stand out on a stage and look at 10, maybe even 20,000 people, because you have this memory of this crowd and you can sense it, and you play and you feel this amazing thing come back from huge amounts of people, but you don't get any of that from recording a Peanuts special. There's no feedback, you know, you just get the satisfaction of playing these great players and then you leave. And then over the years, you just keep hearing this happening. So it's still a bit of an unreality to me, this huge amount of people who may have heard this music.
I do all of these projects that I consider, from my understanding, from my limitation and whatever the good half is, I consider my best work. Nobody pays any attention to it, but if I mention Charlie Brown, they're like, "Damn, what?
Oh, yeah.
You weren't on that, were you?" And I'll be like, that, you know, or something like this. And but I agree with Seward. It is surreal. I never think about it unless it comes up, you know, and it does. I hear about it quite a bit too, and it's like, wow. But one thing I wanted to say about Vince is also, man, he could swing New York style. He had a dirty beat, man. He dug in. I could dig in on that ride cymbal and just not play anything but cymbal with this cat. He put the blues up under it, but also he could play two-handed boogie woogie, and that's hard to do. And some guys play at it, but he could really, every once in a while, I'd go over to his house and he'd say, "Hey, check this out," because he knew I dug it. And he'd cut loose, just him, no band, on some boogie woogie. It's amazing, man. You know, interesting guy, you know.
The beauty of this for us is we've heard all these people say, "Oh, we got into jazz because we didn't know what it was. But we heard that music in Charlie Brown Christmas and we got into jazz," right? For whatever reason, because it's for kids, right? It was a sneaky way to influence and take over the minds of children with jazz in the 60s, when jazz was, you know, maybe not at its peak, but maybe on its, you know, decline as rock and pop started to take over in the late 60s. And we always have thought, we took it for granted, right? It was just something in our family, it's part of what's on the TV every year, and it doesn't mean anything. And even when we did the voices, we're from San Francisco, nobody would know. We were in the Screen Actors Guild, but it didn't mean anything because we didn't do it. Again, it was one weekend a year to do one of these gigs. The beauty of finding these tapes was not only could we release the music that, again, this music was written to underscore a television show. Vince saw the characters in the acts and made themes for these characters to give the Charles Schultz pathos and ethos a voice and a different sound. When we found these tapes, all I was trying to do was recreate some of the music so that we had an anchor point for, here's this song, right? Here's Peppermint Patty. Here's the Easter theme, which didn't exist anywhere except buried in some cases under the dialogue and effects of the TV show. What we discovered is it's this beautiful piece of music, and it's these great men playing these great songs, and it can be, Sean said, this isn't just background music. This isn't elevator music. This is real jazz. This is jazz as it's evolving into the 70s. This is a real thing. It's short. Sometimes it's 30 seconds. Sometimes, like the Woodstock Dream, is 3 minutes. But on the show, it's cut up, it's smushed up, it's buried. Now it gets to live. And for me, it's just as good as the stuff from Christmas from 1965. And you get to hear it for the first time.
And can I just say,
drums. So anyway, Sean, go ahead.
Can I just say two quick notes on that? That Jason's absolutely right. The Woodstock Dream, which again, Eliot, you played on most likely. Woodstock Dream, which we released as a single 2 weeks ago, 50 years after you guys recorded it. That was the piece of music where I heard it when I talked to Jason. Jason had been wanting to look for these tapes that specifically inspired me to go, this is more than background music, like Jason just alluded. And I want to point out, like Mike said, yes, these are short cues, and it probably drove you guys nuts as a traditional, appropriate, ingrained jazz people, jazz troubadours that you all are. But we have found, and Mike, what's coming up soon, hopefully, we got you with Ron McClure on a session where you guys go out. You go out like I heard you in Santa Cruz going out to left field with your jazz. So it goes so far out that we're going to surprise some people with that as well. And we'll give them the what do you call it? Like marijuana is the gateway drug. So this is the gateway drug, so people then can go explore deeper jazz and more of that far out stuff. That's what we hope for the people that listen to.
And it's really cool. And the testament to that, and I want to bring this up, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, Heath, on this, but the cool thing you brought up earlier is we did get Seward and Mike. Mike was in town. That's how we made this work. Mike was in town doing a gig that Sean talked about in the Bay Area. Seward came down from Bend, Oregon, where he lives, and we brought up David Benoit, who scored all of our specials in the 90s forward, to fill in to play piano, and they recreated a bunch of the songs from a bunch of the shows tied to Woodstock. So it's Woodstock's Wake Up, Woodstock's Dream, Woodstock's Pad. It's all these Woodstock songs, Little Birdie, not Woodstock's Pad, but Little Birdie from Thanksgiving. And they recreated it in that same Wally Heider studio that they'd laid it down with Vince 50 years earlier. And that song is a great medley. And to watch Seward and Mike work together, and I don't think they had in 50 years, was the greatest treat. I mean, for me, that was our silver lining for the pandemic. We got to find this music, and we got to see these guys play again. And it was magic. It was a miracle for me, and it was magical for me. And I just thought, I don't know.
So when I suggested to Jason, we should get these guys. They're still playing. And they, or at least I knew they could play. Let's get these guys back together. And it was initially a hard sell because we didn't think it was going to happen with COVID and everything. And it's like a pipe dream because we're already steeped in this stuff. And we're like, these guys were able to come together and recreate this music. There was something magical in that room that I absolutely felt honored and privileged to be there and witness it. And hopefully soon everyone will be able to see this video we made where you can see them working out the tune. And so that I'm excited for the fans.
And again, Sean said, why are these songs not together? Why don't we do this? So Sean came up with the idea, and he and David arranged it. And these guys played it like it was something they'd done every day of their life, and they probably hadn't looked at it in 50 years.
What year was this that the recording was done?
2021. Did it as soon as we got COVID cleared to do it, we did it.
I just remember it felt so good playing with Seward that I as soon as we began to play, I thought, oh man, this is going to go down really well. I could smell it. It was like, yeah, okay. But I wanted to may I ask Seward a quick question here, if I may? This will be a good question for the film, I think. Hey Seward, do you remember doing Little Birdie, bro? Do you remember that tune? Do you remember recording it?
Sure. Yeah, I do.
Did Vince sing with us while we recorded?
I think that was, he sang a little bit while we were rehearsing in the studio, because that's the only rehearsals we had was there. But yeah, he sang it, but I think it's an overdub. I don't really remember.
Okay, and was Tom and those guys in there with us, or did they?
No.
Okay,
that was a different day. I wasn't there for the horn overdubs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I could tell you, Little Birdie was a song Vince sang on Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. It was only the second time he sang for Peanuts. And the first time was Joe Cool in You're Not Elected a couple of years earlier in 72. But when he sings on Little Birdie, it's amazing, right? I mean, he sang it great. And nobody knew it was him on the show. When we released this record, nobody knows it 50 years later. But he sang it twice. He sang it perfectly. It's same thing with Joe Cool. It's exactly the right thing to do for these shows. And part of again, the shows we think are magical. Many of them were on TV every year forever. They're now all on Apple TV Plus. You can watch all these shows, listen to music there. But the music now, when you get to hear it on its own, it's a fully realized piece of history that I think works to tell its own story. And so that's why, I mean, part of the fun for Sean and I, we often call Seward because we become very close with Seward. We'll go, what happened? What happened in your journal? What happened on August 3rd, 1973? Because we can't figure this out. Something is happening in this room. And Seward often go, I have an idea. And he usually has the right answer. He knows what's going on. But for Sean and I, it's like we're forensically trying to figure out this piece of history. It's Bay Area history. it's animation history, it's television history, it's music history, it's jazz history. And so for us, that's the joy of this, is when you hear it, you go, wow, this is pretty cool. When you find a different version that's never been heard before, that was cut from the, I'll tell you something else. Often we talk about the cutting room floor, right? In a movie, it's the parts you don't keep in the show. Most of the things we found that are cutting room floor in the music, it wasn't because they weren't the best performance. It's because they might have been too long, or it might have been too wild or too much for that moment. So there's a more sedate version that made it to the TV show. But then that fun of it's like, wow, no one's ever heard these guys play this before, right? And you guys know with jazz, the solos are always like unique, but there's just like infinite solos we're finding. So it's just a treasure. It's a joy. So anyway, I'm going to be quiet now. Again, I want to thank Sean. Sean went and found Eliot and Mike and Seward. I didn't want to bother anybody with this. And he said, you know what? These guys are awesome. They have these amazing careers. They did a million things. It isn't just the things they did with Vince. And they might want to hear some of this. And so when we got to play them the music, that again was the most gratifying thing, was playing them themselves. Many cases they'd forgotten they did 50 years later.
And look amazing. At this. This is thanks to Seward, who we, like Jason said, we got close with. There's Eliot. That's you, Eliot. Whether you remember yourself or not, that's you 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That's Seward behind you. And in the distance in the background is Vince playing the piano. This is from the Easter Beagle liner notes we have.
That's beautiful, that picture. I remember when those guys looked just like that.
You know what else I love too is the count-ins that we always talk about. You put these things back in, or you leave the audio there, and there's some good ones in here. We've got Vince going, oh, it's like Q12, and then somebody says something, or he's like Q13, whatever. Like that's on the recording. I love that.
What year did he pass?
1976.
And how old was he at that point?
47 years old, maybe 46, 47.
Wow, that's all. Wow.
Just recorded with Seward and with Jim Zimmerman. They just recorded It's Arbor Day, Charlie Brown. That literally that day. And I don't know, Seward, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Seward with him, and it was not an expected thing.
Uh-huh.
No, he died on the gig, Eliot.
Yeah, I had heard that. I just couldn't remember what year it was.
He wasn't on the stand in front of the
audience. Again, I'm sorry?
He wasn't on the stand in front of the audience.
He was, or he wasn't?
He was not.
Oh, so he was backstage or something?
Yeah, they had a room for him, and he was in his room with Jim Zimmerman.
So he died quickly? He had a heart attack?
And an aneurysm.
An aneurysm.
He just passed out.
Uh-huh.
And that anniversary is coming up next year. It's 76 to 26. But I think, his legacy, I mean, I wish that he, and we also wish our father and everybody else could have seen and heard all this music coming out now, because it's 50 years ago. And, he left such an incredible legacy. All 15 of those Charlie Brown shows are still, like I said, you can see them right now on the Apple platform, but most of them were on TV forever. And the music, the Charlie Brown Christmas album, being really the only one that was out for a while of Charlie Brown music, the main one, that thing is still, one of the hottest selling records every Christmas time. It's ubiquitous. It plays everywhere. It plays through until March. It's still playing in some places. And so these records, similarly, we hope can help celebrate his and all of your legacies, because the music is timeless. It sounds like it was done this year. So
and not to be morbid, but I think it's appropriate. It's like raising the dead, in a sense of, this is 50-year-old music. And the one comment that we hear in the press and from the fans that we love is that it sounds like it was made today. So it's creating this aura, this presence, this fidelity. All of this lends itself to making this music literally come to life. It's been hidden in a storage vault for 50 years. It's absolutely astounding. And like you said, when you hear his voice in there, we're always debating how many count-ins to use on each special soundtrack. And it comes down to, do you get a little bit of that personality that Mike alluded to? Do you get a little bit of that fun that Eliot talked about, a little bit of that playfulness? And we hope that the fans appreciate that peek behind the curtain, that the music is informed by the playfulness. And we talked about this with Seward and Valentine's, and Mike and Eliot, I'm sure, know this, but that playfulness comes through in the performance. And it's absolutely a stunning auditory experience.
When I heard his voice, I haven't heard his voice since then. And it's not something that's in my mind, Vince's voice. He's comes to me now and then, like my thoughts of Vince. But as soon as I heard his voice, it hit me right in the heart. It made me know how much I loved that guy, and I really dug Vince. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, whoa, and it brought me right back into the whole experience, and especially brought me back into the Hyde Street or Wally Hyders or whatever. That's what we used to call it. And that piano sitting right there when you went in studio. I could see the whole thing. I had a little Gretsch bebop kit, I could see it. Yeah, man.
Yeah, the joy, the first person I interviewed was Mike Clark at the beginning of COVID. I think it was 2020 June, Mike. I met you over Zoom. I was in Southern California, and I was able to play over Zoom, I think, some of the music initially. And then just to see his reaction to this music from 50 years ago, and like you said, remembering it, coming back to him like a whoosh, I got to watch him experience that. And it's such a joy of mine as a fan of this guy and this guy and this guy, to see them marvel at what they did in their youth. They were in their 20s. And like they said, they don't remember half of what the hell was going on, nor should they. And here it is coming back to them. So it's so cool.
And when we met with Seward, he would play, he'd show us how it was done. He'd show us how Vince made the sounds he could make on the piano, because Seward can play anything. He says he can't play drums. I'm sure he can play drums too. He can play anything. But Seward showed us exactly. We were trying to think, how did he do this? He goes, oh, here's how he did it. He'd do it this way. And it was so amazing to see and hear that realization of that. And again, look, here's the other thing. And again, this is like the shilling part of this. The Record Store Day is going to release for Record Store Day, there's going to be a selections from It's the Easter Beagle, Charlie Brown. Part of it is you don't know which color egg you're going to get. They're all Easter egg shaped vinyl in there. But when you get that record, it's going to be, I don't know what it is now, the sixth version of the TV shows releases of these albums we've done. We're also, the Concord's going to release the A Boy Named Charlie Brown alternate takes. So it's all the cutting room floor stuff from the documentary Our Father Did in '64, which is before these three gentlemen were with Vince, but it's those original musicians that did Christmas too. And that's going to come out for the first, nobody's ever heard those before. Those were in the vault. We've got other stuff coming out at the end of the year, we hope. We just did the Be My Valentine one at the beginning of this year. But again, you have all this music that spans really a decade. It's 65, 64 to 76. And the hope is if we can get all this out, you'll hear this evolution. And again, they all work on their own. And you can hear Peppermint Patty, which he wrote for You're in Love, Charlie Brown in '67. It's the second most used theme behind Linus and Lucy. So your Linus and Lucy go through all these different versions that he liked and played on and again, all stuff he did on gigs with these guys. But then on the shows, he'd be like, well, now we're going to do it Bossa Nova. Now we're going to do a Paso Dobles. Now we're going to do whatever it is. And so you get to hear all those different versions. And same Pepper Patty, you get to hear it being, maybe at some point in the future, you'll hear it being written. And then you'll hear all the evolutions of it through the decade of a song written for that latchkey kid that Charles Schultz added to the strips in the late 60s. So you get, I don't know. Obviously, we're biased because we're helping put these together, but we think this is a pretty cool cultural experience and, walk through all this music. Mike was saying this. Are you guys, do you still lay down Linus and Lucy at any gigs that ever come up? I don't know. Maybe you guys are playing it too. Maybe you've moved on from that. You're doing your other stuff, but what do you, I don't know. Is it something you see as ubiquitous as I do? I don't.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's everywhere. I actually heard Linus and Lucy once when I got in an elevator, and it was from one of the shows. And I just was thinking, this is weird. I'm just in a hotel going up an elevator, and I'm hearing myself along with all this other stuff. Then that experience was over. I got out of the elevator, but it just seems to be in a lot of places for sure.
I have a follow-up question to that. We are winding down. I'm going to be very respectful of your time, but you just made me think of something. When you hear these tracks from decades ago, do you wish that you could do it? Do you wish that you could improve it? Do you know things now you didn't know then, or is it pretty solid? You're like, that's pretty good.
I find it really hard to listen to myself objectively, no matter what it's from, yeah, I mean, not so much about a specific track, but, I wish I could go back now and play with this guy or that guy based on the experience I've had in the last, 30 years or whatever. That's always something in jazz. And I think everybody feels that. And I think everybody has difficulty listening to themselves objectively. It's just comes with the job, sort of, you know. You have to almost rely on other people to get an objective view of yourself.
I find when I'm listening to I have the exact same thing. I don't really love listening to myself. I find that when I listen to myself, when I have to, because I'm involved in a mix or something, if I can somehow psych myself into thinking it's another drummer, I can even name somebody. I can choose it. Then I can kind of hear what's going on and the good parts of it, and not just the blemishes. But when I go back and I listen to I do dig Joe Cool, and what was the other one we talked about? The vocal. I'm sorry.
Little Birdie.
Yeah, I dig those. But when I hear some of those short little things where I was experimenting with funk rhythms that I didn't quite know how to do, that now I can pee on. I mean, I've been playing a long time since these records were made. When I hear myself, and then I can remember when I was attempting to put these things together, and I would try to play them with the attitude that I had them together, but it was BS. I didn't quite have it together, and so I'm like, yeah, some part of me is like, well, I could sure do that better now, and then another part of me is like, yeah, well, it's honest, man. That's how it was. You know, that I was in my 20s. What the hell? I was a kid, you know, and but I actually like listening to what we did. It doesn't hurt me at all, and some of it I dig, man. Especially the short little blast of thing where I can hear us trying to venture into something, knowing we don't have enough time to, just sort of representing something hip that was on my mind, or Seward was looking at, or somebody, you know. I can hear these things, and I find that's fun. It's interesting.
A funny thing for me, listening to some of these tracks that Jason and Sean have sent, is I hear some rather involved bass lines that I can't even believe I played. And I can remember the experience of, I'm never going to get this. I'm used to everything feels pretty good on the upright. I don't know what it is, just the position of your hands and the way you play. When you play this, it's a guitar, and I never played guitar. So I'm trying to play all these things, and I remember the experience of being frustrated at thinking, they're going to run this now. I mean, we're just rehearsing it. Mike's over there in a booth. I'm over here in a booth. I don't know what's going to happen. I'll never make it through this. And then I listen through and say, how did I do that? And so I almost have the opposite feeling 50 years later, like I made it, you know. I can remember being challenged in the moment with all this odd stuff. Piano players love to play left-hand bass lines, just some, and then they want you to do that. You go, oh, brother, where is that? You know, it's somewhere on that neck, and you just work. Okay, you ready? Let's go. We're rolling. Oh, and it goes on and on. One track in particular I can't think of, but anyway, so I have this sort of detached listening back to the Vince Guaraldi things, thinking, wow, it worked. I didn't think it would at the time, but it did.
I remember Vince would just say to me, I'd say, well, is this a rock beat? Is it a shuffle? Is it swinging? What are we doing here? And he'd wave his hand like this. He'd go, don't worry about it. Just play. No tune. I don't know the form, or if there is one.
Yeah.
You'd be like 3, 4, and you just play.
Yeah. We were just going.
Now I dig it. At the time I was a kid, I was like, oh my God, but you had to start, you know.
And I should point out that Mike Clark and Seward McCain played on It's a Mystery, Charlie Brown, and a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. And Eliot played on It's the Easter Beagle, Charlie Brown. Of course, they all toured with Vince throughout the late 60s the early 70s, and most of them.
Sean and Jason, do you guys want to, I'm going to wrap it up unless you want to, did we cover it? You want to talk about the release anymore? Or do you want to push,
So on March 21st, I don't know where I'm pointing. It's the Easter Beagle soundtrack album comes out. It's a black vinyl. There's a purple vinyl. You have to go to your independent record stores to get the purple vinyl, which are individually numbered. Oh, Sean's got one there. It's made out of bio vinyl, which is this thing made out of industrial cooking oil and waste. So it's a fully ecologically responsible album.
Which also sounds amazing. Which sounds amazing. So I'm a huge climate activist. I want to point out, just because we're going sustainable, it does still sound great.
It's a 45. It's 29 minutes long, so we purposely put it on a 45. So it's 12-inch, but you played at 45 RPM to get that maximum sound quality. It is the 19 track. It's also on CD and digital, so you can get it everywhere you can get digital stuff. There are 19. Is it 19 total songs, Sean, or 18? I'm going to remember now.
It's 19 minus the bonus track. 19 plus the bonus track.
18 tracks from the TV special soundtrack. And then that 19th track is a 6-minute bonus Woodstock medley, which is the one that David Benoit and Mike and Seward played on a bunch of Woodstock themed songs that we recorded in 2021.
And it covers 3 or 4 different Peanut specials from the 70s. That music is from 4 different outputs.
It's the first one of these we've done with something that isn't from the show or from the sessions of the show entirely. But we figured because we had Seward and Mike in town and they're associated with this, it would be no problem to add that in there and give you a feel beyond just Easter. It's Thanksgiving, and Sean just said in the other shows. You can still and then on April 12th, Record Store Day, for the Record Store Day event that you can get from your local record stores, only starting on that, no pre-orders, the selections from It's the Easter Beagle, Charlie Brown, which are the ones that are on the die-cut mystery Easter egg looking things. And those are very cute too. So we hope people enjoy that. As you know, we spoke to you recently, Heath, about Be My Valentine, which just came out for the first time ever for its 50th anniversary in January. And there are more to come. And we're really excited about all of them.
And the last thing I want to say, Heath, is that this particular special, everyone's unique, as you've heard me mention in the 5 interviews you've done with us, Heath. This one has that classical feel. There's 5 pieces of music that have a classical feeling to them, but it's all fun. It's all buoyant. There's one song that almost sounds like Margaritaville by Jimmy Buffett. That's how much fun they're having, like time traveling. Jimmy Buffett wasn't playing Margaritaville yet, I don't think, when this came out. But there's a sense of it in the music. The dynamic flow of it is great. You hear Seward playing counter melodies on bass. The drums are going all over the place. It's actually, even these short 30-second glimpses into Vince Guaraldi give you a strong sense of dynamics. And not only that, from song to song, there's 4 Linus and Lucy's, each one different. There's a dreamy one. There's a bossa nova one. There's a percussive one that sounds, again, more, I like to use the term left field, like Mike Clark's jazz sometimes gets, right, Mike? So it gets a little bit further out there. So I think it's a little bit for everybody. And again, the fans seem to be excited for it.
And again, you'll get inside these wonderful photographs that Seward provided us of some of their gigs and time together. You'll get the liner notes by the Guaraldi biographer, Derek Bang, Sean's music analysis like he's done on every album, and you'll get the art from the specials. And so we think it's a really great way to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Peanuts. This is the 51st anniversary of Easter Beagle, but the 50 years of Easter Beagle, the timeless Vince Guaraldi music, and just a little piece of this sort of never-ending American history. And again, when you get the record, you can watch the show on Apple TV Plus. You can get the home video DVD from Warner Home Video. All the usual stuff is available to hear and celebrate this. And it's cool. I mean, again, the Woodstock's Dream was the first single, and there's a lot of Woodstock in this, where Snoopy and Woodstock sort of destroy Woodstock's home and then come back. But even that, I mean, look, what is that? I don't know if you guys had that system, but Woodstock in his birdhouse had this hi-fi, stereophonic, whatever you call it, giant record machine thing that's from the show. So we figured this was the time to play that up. And again, it's another one of the 70s Guaraldi soundtracks where he's evolving the sound. He's taking what is popular and mixing it with his jazz, and you're getting this wonderful synergy.
And he played guitar for the first time in his 40s, and he's playing it on some of these specials. You hear it 4 or 5 times here, always with Woodstock. I think that's on purpose. Schultz named Woodstock after the rock and roll fest of Woodstock in the 60s. And so it makes sense that all the guitar is attributed to those Woodstock tracks and that feeling of rock and roll excitement that Woodstock brings to the show.
I heard Vince mess around on his guitar at his house a few times. Now that you mentioned that, I forgot about that until right now. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you all for being here. This is such a pleasure to be able to. I mean, the music is not just timeless. The music endures because of the feeling of the life that it has, the life that you brought to it in those recordings. I understand it was Tuesday, but it has endured, and I want to thank you all for being here to talk to me about it. Thanks to Sean and Jason for lining this up and for continuing to put out these incredible soundtracks. This is such a pleasure and an honor for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heath. Thank you, Mike, Eliot, and Seward. Still great to see you. Thank you for talking about Vince with us today.
Thank you.
Good to see
Yeah,
you all.
guys.
Be well.